subject matter today is the 30 June checklist and what it kind of means from an SMSF point of view with regards to where we're at with legislation and other things of the like. So joining me today, I have Jason Poser with me. Jason, thank you very much for joining in.
My pleasure.
Deliberately brought Jason in today because I like to share it around the client managers to get them involved with me. But I sit within earshot of Jason, and so it's this time of year I don't deliberately eavesdrop into the conversations, but I get to hear a little bit about what's going on, and so we probably converse more than any other in here, and so it's a really good opportunity to I guess talk about the questions that come through from our both our clients and our advisor network, and sort of we can naturally sort of talk about it during the day. So we're going to naturally talk about it with you all. So thanks for joining me, Jason. Now, what I need to be careful of today is that we always have our stock standard disclaimer, and that is that we're not providing advice and to go away and think about things if people are going to take any sort of action. But importantly, at this time of year, and importantly, given what's happened in the past few weeks and months, there's just so much going on in regards to superannuation that it's important to disclaim to people that there's some stuff that's law, there's some stuff that's awaiting finalisation of law, and then there's some stuff that's still proposed. And that was one of the things you were saying to me, Jason, in regards, I think, mainly to contributions. What was your point that you were saying earlier today to me?
Yeah, look, it feels like a bit of a minefield at the moment. We've got more opportunity to contribute than we ever have. We've got downsizer, carry forward, concessional, such a range of options to us. But with the workplace legislation, and the sort of 66, 67 age people in limbo, probably until now, it feels like there's even more opportunity to sort of trip yourself up. So it's a bit of a unusual point in time, but certainly very I guess a good opportunity for people, but we have to be careful.
Yeah, and I think that's right. I mean, the two of us have both been in the industry for a serious period of time, and I've sort of certainly seen the old days of age-based contribution limits and other things, all the pre-2007 stuff. But I think like never before, we're seeing, and I think everything's a little compacted as well at the moment, given that we had a federal budget in October or November last year, and then another one in May, all on top of the super reform from 2017. So it just feels that we're in like 4 years, particularly, of non-stop changes and updates and things like that, particularly around contributions. But given that a lot of this stuff came in around pensions, it almost seems that pension administration is the easy part of the industry at the moment, albeit that we have got some stuff to contemplate in that space. So look, it's hopefully fairly conversational today with regards to what we're going to talk about. There'll be a little bit of speculation, I suspect, on my behalf on a number of issues as well. But really it's about, I guess, from a learning outcome point of view and the session overview, it's contemplating our budget announcements and legislative changes and whether or not they cloud judgment, because I think there is always a scope, always issue where something new comes in as to, is it in place now? Are trustees aware of the changes? Are the advisor network aware of the changes, and what are the ramifications of it? Being able to identify various strategies when they apply, and like, so if we're talking about contributions, if we're talking about downsizer, for example, appreciating the difference between now and potentially 2022 and what that actually means. And then also, I guess like the minefield conversation piece is spot on, because when we're talking about terms like bring forward and carry forward, but then if we're contemplating contribution reserves and things like that, which I call more of a deferred allocation style strategy, there's so many things that you're talking about that it's easy to get confused. And so really we want to provide you with some of the tools I think that people need to be able to administer their funds, not only up to 30 June, but certainly beyond 30 June as well. So what we're going to focus on today is the impact of indexation, particularly on contribution strategies, and what the last minute passage of the bring forward rules actually means. So there's still a little bit of speculation in regards to that, but we'll work through the pros and cons of what that means. The ramifications of getting the bring forward non-concessional changes wrong. Are they significant? And again, identifying the differences between getting it wrong this year versus getting it wrong next year versus getting it wrong in 2022. And clearly, they're the sorts of areas that will always confuse people, because there's always been confusion about mistaken contributions versus ineligible contributions and excess contributions anyhow. And so one thing that 2022 will do is take away that confusion and just create a single solitary scenario for anybody up to 75, which is if you contribute and you're not allowed to, it's going to be an excess. And so we'll touch on that a little bit later on. The transitioning away from COVID relief measures. Now, this is an interesting one. We spoke about it in our client management meeting yesterday. We're transitioning away from the relief that the government's providing, but we're clearly not transitioning away from COVID-19 from a livelihood point of view. And so there's still huge impact out in the community around COVID and businesses. And I was in Melbourne, thankfully, just before things closed down a little bit there, and you could just see walking around the streets, how many businesses were still impacted and not actually open. And so, the whole COVID relief issue, there's no sort of mandated relief available, but people are still going to be seeking it. And what does that mean from a super fund point of view? We need to have some form of clarity on that moving forward. So, how does all that sit in with some of the proposals and new laws that are in place? And really ultimately just identifying the issues that are in place from 1 July this year, 1 July next year, and what's proposal versus what's rule. So they're the areas that we're going to talk about. So, I call the session about 30 June checklist. So let's, identify some of the key issues from a self-managed superannuation fund point of view that we need to make sure we check off on every year. And that is, firstly, have all contributions been banked by 30 June. So I assume from a client management point of view, we go to some effort to communicate with our advisors and our direct trustees to make sure they understand the ramifications of banking by 30 June.
Yeah, that's right. And people these days are sort of a lot more prepared, I think, with contributions and pensions. A lot of people are taking them out by sort of May, June, and not leaving it to the last week of June, which is a nice sort of change from maybe 5 or 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And obviously, contributions being a key one, especially now with some people using maybe the ATO clearinghouse or other clearinghouses that take a little while to clear. If you can look at getting stuff in early June, you're going to be sleeping a little bit easier in the last week. Yeah.
It's almost, I think that clearinghouse one, it's a point that is just often lost on me because it's not something that I see on a day-to-day basis. But I think it's such a relevant point that if we're talking about 30 June contribution dates, if you're using clearinghouses, you're almost talking about like a 15 June date to ensure that the money gets brought into the SMSF by that 30 June period. And I think we also get a little bit I'm not sure what the word that I'm searching for here is, but we all kind of in the world of electronic transfers and that we think, it's a bit easier, I can do it last minute because of the OKSA or whatever that immediate app is. And I know, and I think I've raised it in this forum before, when I press that button on my phone and then I go to my bank account, it's not always immediately there, depending on the relationship between the banks and the naming of the accounts and all those sorts of elements. So I think it's certainly an area to be mindful of. Now, again, when we were talking about this from a client management point of view the other day, it took me a little bit by surprise because we've had a halving of the minimum pension obligation. But, you still identified for me that there are still funds out there that haven't met their minimum, even though we have that 50% reduction at the moment.
Yeah, look, that's always going to be the case. I think people that take their pension as a sort of one-time withdrawal or even a couple of withdrawals in June, they still exist. And I guess our team is sort of sitting there pouring through the system, the accounting software, making sure that people have taken their pension. sort of every couple of days now. So
Yeah.
it's a constant monitoring from our team, and yeah, I guess each one that takes it out in June is sort of one more that you can tick off and not worry about, which is nice.
Nice, yeah, cool. And so look, again, we'll talk a little bit about the pension relief being extended by a year as well, and then of course having the assets appropriately valued, which is something that really trustees should be identifying now. And it may have been a case with COVID last year that they went out and looked for property valuations. As we know, the property market didn't potentially take as big a hit as many thought, and certainly from a valuation point of view, we're now in a situation with residential properties where prices are skyrocketing in many areas, and so there may be a greater obligation this year versus last year to get property values in from an audit point of view to make sure you are reflecting the current position of the fund, particularly if you are having to calculate minimum pensions, but also importantly from that whole total super balance concept. And a lot of today, again, as seems to be the want of many of the presentations I do, a lot of today is hinging on the whole total super balance concept, and so asset valuations are pretty critical. So when we think through the standard issues, we then have to I guess contemplate what other pension contributions and asset strategies have been contemplated, what have we had to think about based on available information. And so then what we need to know is what information are we talking about. And so here is where we start to delve a little bit into recent legislative updates, budget announcements, and of course elements such as indexation. And so probably where I want to start with is the 2021 federal budget announcements. And I've broken it down, I guess, into, well, for self-managed super funds, you've probably got three key areas here to deal with, but probably the five bigger superannuation announcements was clearly the downsizer eligibility moving from 65 to 60 from 1 July 2022. The first home super saver scheme deposit withdrawal increased to $50,000. The removal of the work test age from 67 to 74 for non-concessional and salary sacrifice. I think that's an oddity, obviously referencing salary sacrifice, because if it's all to do with the work test, well, salary sacrifice is clearly linked to employment anyhow. But the non-qualification for personal deductible, I think, is a key issue, which I'll touch on a little bit later. The removal of the 450 from a super guarantee exemption point of view, and then the legacy pension amnesty with the capacity or the 2-year window that'll open up to potentially close down these sorts of pensions. But what I would say about these measures is they each come with their issue, and like the 450 is probably, to me, the cleanest of the measures, and one that's probably long overdue for a super guarantee system that's been around for a substantial period of time. The downsizer contribution, to me, is a tricky one because we're obviously expanding the period of time from a sale of a house point of view. You have restrictions where you must make that contribution within 90 days. And so how is that going to impact other things such as non-concessional contribution strategies, bring forward strategies, and all those sorts of things? If you sell a house in one financial year and make a contribution, and you had planned to make non-concessionals the year after, what impact on your total super balance is that downsizer going to have? So whereas before the downsizer effectively kicked in post the standard recontribution strategy timeframe, now it's in effect in probably 5 years beforehand, and the recontribution strategy, particularly if we move into a removal of the work test, will be something that people will be able to contemplate right up until 74. And so, don't be clouded by the downsizer side of things, and looking at it as a great opportunity, because it may be a great opportunity, but it may come with its shortcomings around other contribution strategies. The first home super saver scheme, similarly, not something that we widely talk about or use in the SMSF space, but just, I guess, identifying that if the amount that we can draw is increasing from 30,000 to 50,000, then we need to be able to explain to clients. So again, this is the whole concept of the checklist and identifying what are our opportunities. Is if we've gone from $30,000 with a 15,000 contribution limit each year, then we're talking about moving from a 2-year strategy to a 4-year strategy, because at $15,000 we're only going to get up to 45,000 in over the first 3 years. So that next amount's not going to come in until the 4th year. So to get the full benefit of it, you're contributing into the super environment for a 4-year period. And if we look at the last 4 years, anything goes, the number of changes that have been proposed in that sort of period of time. And so, the longer you spread something out, what other issues are associated with it. So, I think all of these issues do have problems associated with it, which will only be, I guess, dealt with when we move into the world of actually having legislation. And I think the legacy pension one is the big one for me. And whilst I've put there that everything commences on the 1st of July 2022, that's all subject to legislation being introduced. My gut feel is that the legacy pension amnesty is the one that will have the greatest consultation period, having been involved with a group of my peers in that space, talking quite regularly with the ATO on this matter. There's certainly a lot of people with a lot of opinions on this area, and we have a lot of market link pensions that we deal with, and I see that there is some huge benefit, subject to the final rules, for them to potentially unwind. But the pros and cons of lifetime and fixed term pensions, are predominantly lifetime pensions being wound up under this measure, versus, say, filtering money out of a reserve as such if a member's passed away. There's going to be a bit of balancing to do. So, it's a good measure to at least have something that we can act on, but what we're actually acting on is something that we need to wait and see. So the budget is the speculative part of how we move beyond 30 June this year, but we need to keep an eye on it, because we might already have clients acting on what they've heard and saying, well, I'm just going to hold back because the rules are going to change. And that removal of the work test, the reason I've highlighted that there is because that's my issue with non-concessional contributions. Is right now, if you're over 67 and you don't work, you can't make a non-concessional contribution. And so if you inadvertently put it into the super fund or super environment, it must be returned within 30 days. Now, we know most people don't return it in 30 days, but they then have to actually bring the money out. So there's a reportable breach in not returning it in that 30-day period, but the rectification is you pull the money out. Bring in a removal of the work test, and ultimately for self-managed super funds, there's no such thing as mistakes anymore. And so any non-concessional contribution becomes an excessive non-concessional contribution, and then you're subject to going through the ATO system. And I think that's a real warning sign for people, is that the rules will change. We'll have certainty after 1 July 2022 if that rule comes in, but it's something that we need to be mindful of. So I just think we need to be aware of that. Of course, the other thing is the legislative update. So last week, I've been, I think, almost in every webinar that I've spoken about when I've talked about contributions this year, I've said, maybe this week we'll get something on the bring forward contributions. Nothing better than getting it 2 weeks before the 30th of June to really sort of, I guess, whet the appetite, but also give you a sense of nervousness as to exactly how it's going to work. And I want to touch on that in a moment, because it's come in, the more flexible super laws around the bring forwards have come in with some amendments, and those amendments are interesting to say the least. The 6-member superannuation fund and the Your Future, Your Super bill have also both come in, both taking effect in the new financial year. The 6-member fund, ultimately for me, we spoke about this to a certain extent yesterday, this is where we now have to get serious about reviewing trust deeds and other things, because if members are looking to add more than number 4, where do they sit with reference to their current deed, and whether there's any restriction within that deed on the number of members. But likewise, if we've got and I haven't honestly looked at every state, but I know New South Wales trust law restricts you to 4 individual trustees. So if you're going beyond that in your self-managed superannuation fund, then obviously the requirement to have a corporate trustee is a key issue. And with that, and we also touched on this, and I don't want to get into this to any great level, but with the introduction of director identification numbers coming in over the next sort of 3 years, then the corporate trustee environment that we live in means that there's a lot more administrative red tape that we're going to have to go through, and need to be mindful of all of that. Your Future, Your Super, if I've got it in the right order there, what it actually means to us. probably very little other than the whole stapled SMSF or the stapled super fund bit where you can take your fund with you. Clearly not something big in the SMSF environment. However, to add children to the fund, if that is your desire, is where something might come out of that. So let me touch quickly on the legislative changes, and then we'll get into a little bit of the strategy side of things, which will be the key part of today's presentation. Changes to the excess concessional contribution rule. Now, I'm a little bit sceptical about this, and feel that if this is the reason that we waited 15 months or whatever for the bring forward rules coming in, then it's somewhat of a letdown. Everyone will be saying that it's nice to have the excess concessional contribution charge removed, and it'll be removed from the 1st of July 2021. But were we crying out for it? I don't think that as an industry it was a huge issue. It sort of was a reasonable disincentive for people to exceed their concessional contribution cap. I guess it'd be slightly cheeky of me to suggest that one of the things that I identified in watching this legislation pass was that many in the Senate chamber pay excess concessional contributions tax charge, and so who was the real winner out of this? So I'll say no more. But it's one of those areas that I don't want us to be in an industry where we're promoting strategies to exceed caps to defer taxation liabilities to the ATO, and I can see that sort of stuff will start coming around from 1 July. So we need to be mindful of that. And then the other one, which is the recontribution of COVID-19 release money. So the capacity to identify money that we took out up to that $20,000 over 2 years, and the ability for us to put that back in to the super environment between the 1st of July 2021 and the 30th of June 2030. So that's a fairly extensive period. But to make an election when we do that, to say that this was COVID released money and therefore to have it excluded from the non-concessional cap, probably a nicety in the sense that, if you didn't necessarily need that money and you've got the capacity to put it back in, but you took it out based on the circumstances at the time, then I think that it's great to show that there's a capacity to have it not measured against the non-concessional cap. But 2030, I mean, if you were impacted by COVID in 2020, and then you're making a $10,000 non-concessional contribution in 2030, is that really linked back to COVID? So, it is what it is. It's going to be just an additional administrative thing that we need to be mindful of. Thankfully, COVID release money and self-managed super fund wasn't a huge deal. Like 45,000 self-managed super funds were impacted by it, or numbers thereabouts compared to, say, the industry funds. But of course, if we've got non-SMSF members that we're advising on, then having that capacity to say you can put some money back in and potentially not have it counted towards your caps is beneficial. So I think they're reasonable measures. And the COVID stuff, I think this is for those clients that have property investments particularly, but anyone that's got loans to related companies, invested in investments in related companies where potentially the valuations didn't move last year. We know that if you had in 1819 and 1920, if you had any sort of breaches of the 5% rule, you had to put in place your plan, but you didn't have to act on it necessarily because of the way that COVID impacted the markets. But from a moving forward point of view, we're not going to have that luxury anymore, and so we need to make sure that you're acting on plans. If you still exceed the 5% this year, then you're going to need to act by 30 June next year. And similarly, from a rent deferral point of view, any rent deferrals that were entered into last year, which would conceivably be an in-house asset, will still continue to be exempt from the in-house asset. But if we're looking to offer rent deferrals from 1 July, then they're not subject to an in-house asset exemption, and you're potentially creating both non-arm's length income issues and in-house asset issues for self-managed super funds. So, particularly for our property investors out there, they need to be mindful of the movement into the more arm's length commercial arrangements that they need to have in place from 30 June. So a couple of key issues to be mindful of. But now let's sort of jump into the indexation side of things. And and tie together what indexation means when linked with some of those announcements and the budget areas there. Because to me, indexation is something that we've been waiting for and writing about and presenting on for a long period of time. But with this whole minefield of contribution changes, you know, how important is 1 July versus pre-30 June from a transactional point of view? And so I think it's a key area for us to touch on. So you've got the caps there, the 27,500 concessional and 110 non-concessional, increasing the bring forward up to 330, and then of course the transfer balance cap from 1.7 million. I'm going to touch on the under 67 bit and the bring forward shortly, but clearly from 1 July there is no question about anyone at 65 and 66 using the bring forward rules next year. For us, it's more about whether or not they can use it this year. So from a total super balance point of view, I think what we need to understand is that we've got certain thresholds that move with indexation, like the non-concessional contribution limit, co-contribution, spouse contribution eligibility. And then we've got other thresholds that don't move anywhere near or at all, regardless of indexation. So our carry forward concessional stays at 500,000. Our work test exemption 300,000, our disregarded small fund assets 1.6 million. That's the great anomaly amongst it all, because it doesn't move with the transfer balance cap. And then our T-bar lodgement, that $1 million threshold. So, you know, when you look at those numbers, I think what really sort of gives me the greatest amount of interest is watching the market improve over the last 12 months means for some people where last year we're pretty close to those numbers, this year we're going to be well over those numbers and those thresholds. And so is 2020-21 financial year the last opportunity that our clients have? And I know, and we'll touch a little bit more on some of the strategies in a moment, but just from a pension commencement point of view, I mean, how many questions would you get at this time of year about when's the right time to set up a pension?
Yeah, look, it's certainly popping up, and probably popped up probably in the last couple of months more than anything.
Yeah.
Tying in with that was the non-concessional uncertainty for people aged 65 and 66. But yeah, there's certainly people, you know, contemplating holding off.
Yep.
To take advantage of the indexation and starting at 1 July 2021 instead of now. So yeah, there's again, sort of just comes down to what we were talking about earlier. You've just got more questions, I think, than you've ever had, and more to consider.
Yeah.
Instead of sometimes in the past where it was just sort of, well, we're going to do it now, and that's a no-brainer. Now you're sort of contemplating a few different things at once.
Yeah, and look, and I think one of the things for me is that I don't want to say once in a lifetime events, but when you get once in a lifetime events, and let's hope that COVID-19 is a once in a lifetime event for many of us, but when you get those on top of semi-regular events like global financial crisis and market corrections and big drop-offs, tech bubble bursts, all those sorts of things. And so you can almost naturally build into the cycle of superannuation funds that every 8 to 10 years there's going to be a significant downfall in the market, and then a reasonable correction. Now there's no sort of science behind what I've just said, other than that's a reality of what's happened over the last 20 years. And so it's really about maximizing the downturns. You know, often there's a lot of doom and gloom conversation around it, but it is the time that opportunities are created. And so it's almost a little bit, and I've referenced these terms in the presentation, it's a little bit of, you know, hindsight versus foresight. And contribution strategies now, I think in the environment of total superannuation balance is a great hindsight strategy, because you get to look backwards to make a decision now. Whereas pensions really, you need to have that foresight as to act relatively quickly to be able to maximize the benefits of, say, a decrease in asset valuations and transfer balance caps and those other things. So $1.7 million is a great threshold from an indexation point of view for those that are nowhere near that, because, you know, they've got a lot of space. But for those that were pretty close to it at the start of last year, what are the ramifications, and we'll touch on that a little bit as we go through. So, we have to contemplate, we have to look into the glass ball a little bit there, and we have to think about when's the right time to do pension commencements as such. And, do we understand the, excuse me, the requirements around the personal transfer balance cap? The bring forward non-concessionals, are we eligible now? Should we be doing it now versus should we be waiting? And I think there's some pretty clear-cut positions there for some people. For others, there's a little bit of a question mark as to when to act, but we need to take all that consideration. And then similarly, the same would apply with the carry forward stuff. With that lower $500,000 threshold. I think the carry forward is one of the greatest measures introduced in the last 10, 15 years for superannuation. It's just a shame that it's linked to $500,000 because the whole idea of, okay, well, you didn't maximize it in 1 year, so therefore you can use it again. To me, without a threshold, it would be the ultimate contribution strategy. It has a threshold, so we then have to work around the pros and cons of that. And and again, I say all this understanding and recognizing that the median SMSF balance is around that $400 and something thousand mark. So for half of the SMSF population, these strategies are not problematic, and therefore you could push that up and saying for 3/4 of the population, even the bring forward rules aren't necessarily a problem. It's just that last sort of, let's call it 10 to 20% of members that have more than that 1.5, 1.6 that are, that we have to be able to work with, but we should never work with them to the detriment of the others who we can promote good strategies to at any given point in time. So we do need to understand what the key issues are. So I guess I wanted to start off because I think pensions are an area that we can sort of work through relatively quickly this year. And as sort of Jason just alluded to before, we do get questions all the time, and there's been speculation because a lot of people might not want to start a pension until they've made their contributions. So there's uncertainty around whether we can make contributions and what that means, what the impact is on our pension commencement. Things like carry forward contributions, things like deferred contribution strategies where you need to have 290, 170 notices. They've all got to be in place before you start a pension. They're I guess the strategic elements that we often overlook a little bit in that regard. We go, okay, we can start a pension. When do we want to do that? 1 July. 1 July is a great commencement date for pension commencement. But have we actually done our 290, 170 notice for our personal deductibles for the year before? Because that has to all be put in place before we can actually kickstart the pension. So, there is these timing issues that we need to be mindful of. So look, I just wanted to run really quickly through the personal transfer balance cap indexation because, we've heard from the ATO, I think only beginning of this week or the end of last week, that by the 5th of July, MyGov will be updated and people's transfer balance cap information will be reviewed with any indexations amount. So 5th of July, let's see whether we hold the ATO to that, whether it's all up there on that time. It'd be great if it is, because obviously it's closeness to 1 July, and therefore our capacity to make decisions, albeit that probably the most important part of the whole MyGov reporting is total superannuation balance, and that stuff's not going to be updated until probably at the earliest November for a lot of clients from a lodgement point of view. But still beyond that, you're looking at this time next year that a lot of people's total superannuation balance will be updated once they've done their lodgement for the 2021 financial year and lodged their personal returns. So, there's areas that again are not perfect, and we need them to be a little bit more perfect from a planning and strategic point of view to ensure that we don't create excess transfer balance cap situations. So we're not just talking about excess contributions, we're also talking about that excess transfer balance cap as well. So the way that the personal transfer balance cap operates is really that we look at when we start that pension, if we've started a pension in that first 4-year cycle, how much of that how much of our personal transfer balance cap is represented. Anyone at 1.6 is already done and dusted. But in this example here, the personal transfer balance cap of 1.6, their transfer balance account of 1.2 meant they've got an unused cap of 25%, 400,000 available, means that they get 25% indexation on that $100,000, providing them with a personal transfer balance cap of 1.625. So that's the basic rule for how that operates, and we understand that for all of our clients in that situation. We've got to understand and remember that the personal transfer balance cap is indexed subject to the highest transfer balance account. So, if this client did a commutation and reduces their transfer balance account, that gives them cap space. So it gives them a capacity to put more money back in up to their personal transfer balance cap, but it doesn't impact the indexation. So we've still always got to operate from that highest balance there. So that's something to be mindful about. But the question to me, and this is the foresight v hindsight concept, is that if we defer our clients to 1 July start date, then they're going to get the extra $100,000. But on the flip side, what's the impact of ECPI? And Jason, you said a moment ago that at this point in time, for a lot of clients, it's that concept around wait until 1 July to start the pension, then you've got that new cap. And I think that's the 99% answer. That's the answer we should be giving in the majority of situations, because clients are well and truly below that $1.7 million. But for some people, is it going to be that case of a lost opportunity? And strategically, I'm presenting this now based on current circumstances. Clearly, it's a little bit about using hindsight in regards to foresight in the future if we have another sort of event like COVID-19 or some form of market correction to be mindful of. Because if we got a client that had $1.6 million on the 1st of July 2020, then their current value is $2,032,000. Now, you're all saying to me, I can see it, all of you there, you're all saying, how did you come up with $2,032,000? Well, from an ASX point of view, the All Ordinaries are up 27% since the 30th of June last year. Now, yes, they dropped a little bit yesterday, and so after doing the presentation, they did drop, but at the weekend, they're up 27%. Now, that is a reflection on one of the indexes. If you look at other parts of the market, I saw a report that said some parts of the market are up 40%. So the doom and gloom associated with March 2020 and the huge market drop-off as a direct result of COVID-19 and market shutting down and industry shutting down, all sorts of things, has seen an anomaly where our 30 June valuations were dropping off, or did drop off to a significant degree, but in many respects have already regained not just where we were, but indeed beyond that. And so, subject to how a fund invests, that $1.6 million client that's highly invested in the stock market, their valuation may have gone significantly beyond the transfer balance cap from a pension strategy point of view. And so it's the question that we probably get asked a little bit now, and Jason, you might be able to give me some insight on this. Do we get asked the question, how far back can we go?
Yeah, we certainly do. Obviously, we can't go back to 1 July 2020, so you probably shouldn't have put that in there, Tim. But no. We'd be looking at 1 April as probably the latest that we could go back. But it is a very interesting sort of thing that you raise, because the difference between valuations in March 2020 and now is astronomical.
Yeah.
Because I was looking at a fund that we look after, and a client had actually passed away around that time, and I was doing some calculations now, and the account valuations were almost double, and I thought I'd mess something up.
Yeah.
But they just sort of had great investments since then.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's you're going to talk about contributions in this regard in a second, but it is really interesting to sort of look at how that impacts the contribution ability and also the pension side.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the absolute disclaimers that we make is that backdating pension commencements is not something that we're talking about here, because that's not something that can be identified. But the conversations people need to have with their clients is that question of trustees identifying when they wish to commence a pension, and then going back to the reporting obligations and all those sorts of other things. It's why I've said hindsight's a wonderful thing, and to use it for future strategy reference points, is that, you know, last year in 2020, everybody was talking about pre-COVID. So come February 2020 and December 2019, all anybody was talking about was whether or not the transfer balance cap was going to be indexed at 30 June 2020. You know, all of the press, the ATO even updated their website. So everyone was referencing the transfer balance cap may go up to 1.7. So we're finally going to get indexation. Now, of course, it didn't happen, you know, and so then everyone said, well, okay, now we need to hold off and wait another year to potentially get that indexation. So let's hold off on potentially pension commencements and those other sorts of things. But, you know, we need to recognise the situation for what it is. And in this sort of situation, what we've got is an opportunity that's not been maximised. So the client with $1.6 million at 1 July 2020, who now has $2.03 million, it's not that they don't have a good position to be in, because still basically 3/4 of their fund or higher is in exempt current pension income environment, but they didn't fully maximise it. And so, you know, we have to identify that and go, you know, do we start now under 1.6, or do we now wait and go for 1.7? Now, clearly in that situation, to me, it's a no-brainer. You don't go for the 1 June start date and pay nil pension on a 1.6 transfer balance cap. You now would go, or let's go to 1 July and start with 1.7. And so we've got $300,000 in accumulation rather than, you know, $400,000. And so that's the question piece that we have to identify. And then the flow on from that is that the 50% pension reduction that we've had extended, that actually gives us a little bit of opportunity for the client who has missed out on maximising the ECPI. It becomes a little bit more strategic now, and that is if we've got a pension commencement of 1.7 and we've got an accumulation interest of $330,000, our minimum pensions for a 65-year-old is sitting at 42,500 versus the 85, which it would have been under the normal pension regime. Is 42.5 sufficient for that client, or are they actually wanting to draw close to that 80,000? Then do we utilize and apply the lump sum withdrawal strategy and start to reduce that accumulation interest down by drawing over and above from that amount versus the pension? And if we do that, then strategically now in June, we need to be talking to our clients and saying, okay, well, the earlier in the year you take lump sums, the better it is from an ECPI point of view, because you're actually diminishing the accumulation balance at the start of the year rather than the end of the year, which is increasing your proportion of assets supporting the pension. And that's, I guess, the piece you take out of it. Okay, we've missed one opportunity. What opportunities can we create from that missed opportunity? And you know, for that client, taking out excess amounts from the accumulation is one opportunity.
And I mean, if this, you know, this example here, if this is one member and the other member spouse perhaps only has 500 grand and they're 64,
Yep.
all of a sudden you're looking at a situation where you can almost empty that accumulation interest with a lump sum and pop it into the other member. So lots of things to think about.
Well, that's right. And you know, that is, you know, that's the approach that we look at with the clients, is that you know, my 27% valuation just so happened to work out to be $2,000 above the future non-concessional bring forward amount. Lo and behold, the miracle of that. But yeah, the capacity to take a lump sum withdrawal out potentially for the full amount, and as Jason says, recontribute that in for a spouse subject to their total super balance, you know, and then potentially commence a pension for them. You know, and you know, if that spouse is anywhere up to 67 next year and has less than that $1.48 million, then, you know, wacko, we've just got 100% of the fund in an ECPI environment or tax exempt environment. So, you know, there's all these things, and I think that's probably the greatest window that's been opened up by these rule changes, is that conditions of release, recontribution strategies, all those sorts of things all meld into that sweet spot of 65 to 67 now, where we can actually create opportunities for our clients. So look, I want to work through and mindful of time, but also mindful of various strategies. I really just want to highlight some of the key issues associated with the bring forward rules and the contribution opportunities before finishing off just on a couple of the budget announcements. But the bring forward rules now being under 67. This comment that I'm about to make is basically me being ultra conservative. So I don't want you to take what I'm about to say as being a definitive legal position, because really what we need to hear is the tax officer's position on this. But the explanatory memorandum and the law in regards to bring forward state that this change, so the increase to age 65 on the 1st of July, this change becomes law on the 1st of January, 1st of April, 1st of July or 1 October to occur after the day the Act receives royal assent. So firstly, the Act hasn't received royal assent. I think I heard on the radio this morning the Governor-General is interstate, and so they couldn't act on some other things yesterday. So they're just waiting for the Governor-General to return, and so we haven't got royal assent yet. So change becomes law on
tracking the Governor-General's locations just to make sure we can get our SMSF law passed.
That's right. Yeah, it's a new app. It's how to receive royal assent based on tracking where the GG is at any given point in time. But the next part says once law, it applies to non-concessional contributions made on or after to 1 July 2020. Now it depends on which part of this sentence or these sentences takes precedence. Is it that the law comes into effect from 1 July? And you can apply it to any contributions that have been made after a certain date? Or is it that you could always make contributions from last or this financial year, and it doesn't actually matter when the law is passed, you can go back and apply it to contributions made now. Now, the reason I say that is that I don't think any of us expected this law to take this long to pass. And so I think there would have been a natural expectation that it would have all just flown through earlier in this financial year and therefore been in effect. It's just that it's taken effect in the second to last week of June. And so it pushes us close to the boundary of what that piece of legislation states. The Treasurer provided a release last week to say that this applies to all contributions made on or after 1 July 2020, which is in effect regurgitating what the law says. What we really want is confidence from the regulator that they won't go and apply excess contributions to contributions made in June this year. The SMSF Association, I was in communication with them. I have asked that question of the tax office as well. But I think we all appreciate that it means that we can now make contributions, and contributions this year will be counted. If you are 65 or 66, you can use the bring forward. But I think it's just about having that absolute certainty that we want to understand. So if we reflect on that, and we know that the previous bring forward rules were 300,000 if you had less than $1.4 million, and then subsequently lesser the more you had. And then for next year, it's 330,000 if you've got less than 1.48 million. So in a quick sort of summary of the bring forward rules, the assessment you would be making for next year from a bring forward is, how far back do we go? And I often say, well, you need to go back 5 years to get the actual position. In this situation here, the client contributed 150,000 in the 1920 year. So what we need to be mindful of next year is that they've only got $50,000 left. So indexation is a beautiful thing in many respects, but you don't entitle yourself to it until such time as you've exhausted your current bring forward period. So for this client, they're not going to get 50,000 plus 30,000 next year. They're only going to get the 50,000. So something to be mindful of there. And of course, just to bring in the budget stuff from before, the downsizer is going to impact these sorts of strategies as we move forward. But more importantly to me is contemplating whether that extra $30,000 of the 330 is worthwhile waiting for in the hindsight versus foresight strategy argument. And this is where contributions are subject to hindsight. Because in this situation, we take a client with a total superannuation balance of $1.35 million. Right? Now, we can talk about anyone, it doesn't matter what their age is, and let's assume we're talking about anyone that was including people up to 66. And let's assume they invested in the all ordinaries, right? Well, what is their total superannuation balance going to be at 1 July 2021? Well, if we talk about 1 July 2021, and again, we reflect on that 27% market improve, then that client with $1.35 million is very likely going to have more than $1.7 million come 30th of June. Now, I appreciate that obviously I'm not working in exact science there, but we're going from a situation where somebody this year is fully entitled to use the bring forward rules versus somebody who next year isn't entitled to make a non-concessional contribution at all. And so, you know, the hindsight of the total super balance being reflective of the previous 30 June is one of those situations where we can look at a portfolio valuation today and get a rough idea of, gee whiz, that portfolio has increased by 30% or 20% or whatever the number might be. What is our rough impact going to be of that? But knowing that we can potentially provide a better benefit by making that contribution using the bring forward rule this year versus waiting. So then it comes down to, okay, well, you know, Tim, you've just said, what if the ATO interpret things differently? Yes, well, that is a risk. Now, the risk is that the ATO come out and say that it's only going to apply from next year. And if that's the case, then potentially you've got an excess non-concessional contribution this year based on a misunderstanding of the legislation. And if we work that out, and again, this is not an exact calculation, but if you put in $300,000 instead of the 100 that you're entitled to, you've got an excess of 200 for our 66 and 65-year-olds, an excess of $200,000, which if you then lodge, so you've got to assume we'll have an answer well and truly into the new financial year. You've got a situation where if you lodge early from an SMSF point of view and from a personal tax point of view, then you may limit your associated earnings to roughly around that $20,000 mark where you're paying marginal tax. Now, then you've got to weigh up, am I better off contributing $300,000 now and potentially being slugged with a tax liability on earnings of $20,000 versus missing out on the ability to make non-concessional contributions? And I suspect some people will take the approach of going, well, it's worth taking the risk given that everybody is saying that the rules apply now. And it's just people like Tim being conservative and speculating around whether they don't apply. Of course, we can also wait another week and hopefully get an answer from the ATO this week on that, and then we'll be out to everybody saying, you know, go your hardest with non-concessionals this year. So, you know, I don't necessarily think it's a bad outcome there by using the bring forward, but again, it's going to be subject to advice and identifying in any advice piece that clients may be subject to excess contributions if the rule is interpreted in a certain way. Carry forward concessional.
Sorry, I'll just jump in. On the even if we sort of disregard the bring forward in those situations,
yep.
I have seen a couple of clients in the last week who had, let's say, a member balance of 30 June 2020 of 1.5 million,
yep,
and their balance now is 1.75.
Yeah.
And so they could contribute 100,000 non-concessional because they satisfied the work test, all the other requirements, whatever. You know, until 30 June,
yeah.
But come next week or 2 weeks from now, they'll be ineligible because their transfer balance cap, their total super balance is 1.75. So even though you mentioned that, you know, the calculations are a little bit selective in one way and not everyone's going to grow their fund by 30%, there, you know, there certainly are cases that I've seen where that is the case. So, yeah, just, I guess, be aware that there are going to be cases where you know, you've got a window and it shuts sort of in 8 days' time.
Yeah, and look, and again, we are talking about a small percentage of funds that have that had $1.35 million at 30th of June last year and turned 65 or 66, you know, and invested in something that's grown 27%. So all these things is why what we're saying is you've got to plan for the unknown and try and work around it. And it's a little bit the same with the carry forward concessional, and you'll all get copies of the slides, and so you can work through the numbers here and critique me on my maths to see if I'm correct. But the carry forward concessional, I think, also, and contemplating downsizer as well, it also comes with a caveat that if somebody had a total super balance of $400,000 last year and is in that same sort of scenario from an investment point of view, then this year they would have, subject to making 10,000 contribution in 18-19 and then 15,000 in 19-20. Well, they would actually have a cap, an adjusted concessional contribution cap this year of $50,000, which means that they could use that that full cap because of the $400,000 balance last year. But of course, if we then consider the market growth, then their total super balance is going to be over $500,000 from 30th of June moving forward, which means that their adjusted cap's going to drop back to the standard cap, and how much they contribute is going to be significantly reduced. And so we do need to make sure that we don't just get caught up in the whole you get to carry forward 5 years, because you can still carry forward the amounts, but it's only your ability to use them is going to be subject to total super balance. So this could be a year where you're using those catch-up amounts, and conceivably then incorporating that with the idea of contribution reserving. Now, contribution reserving is really a strategy identified for those that are in their last year of employment with greater taxable income that they're looking to offset,
or a large capital gain,
versus those who will be continuing to receive employer contributions and paying on a regular ongoing basis. But, just to identify how it works, clearly what you look at is in a year where you've got a cap of 25,000 this year, you've then got the indexation of next year's cap, giving you the ability to contribute 25 up to 30 June this year. But then from the 1st of June to the 30th of June, if you contribute that additional $27,500, then it can be allocated to next year's cap, right? So the key to all of this is that the contributions are deductible in the year of receipt, but they're assessable against the cap in the year of allocation. But the tax office system is and this is not a comment about the tax office system, but it doesn't, or it can't recognise the use of contribution reserves, for want of a better term, or one of a poorer term actually. But you have to go through the process of lodging the notice to have that $27,500 allocated to the next year, whereas the accounting system has to recognise everything this year from a pure tax point of view. Now, where that fits in nicely with the future is around the whole concept of the work test removal. And particularly if we try to identify that from a work test removal point of view, we're going to have clients who after age 67 won't be able to make deductible personal contributions if they're not working, subject to the post 2022 changes, but they will still in that last year, so the year that they turn 67, they'll be able to look to use the contribution reserving to potentially offset other passive income that they might generate in that future. So the work test removal, and of course you've still got the capacity for those with less than 300,000 to use the work test exemption the year after they cease employment. So the caveat there is people need to identify those issues now, because again, if they've got less than 300,000 last year, they're going to be in a position where this 30 June they're probably going to be over that 300,000, and so one of those areas to be mindful of. So I think there's some key strategies and takeaways out of all of these changes that we need to be mindful of moving forward. So what I want to finish off with is just really general commentary around a couple of other sort of budget announcements, and really to me it's the residency test and the legacy pension. So I touched on the legacy pension one before. There's still speculation around the market linked pensions and those that have made changes since 2017 around the debits and credits from the transfer balance account. So I think we still need to watch that space very closely. But the residency test one is certainly one for me that I hold fairly dear to my heart. I've been sort of monitoring this pretty much since the day I got into the industry and got my very first SMSF audit from the ATO about whether or not the client satisfied the residency test. And so, the tax arbitrage of that, of paying top marginal tax for not living in Australia, has always troubled me. And so the change to the residency test, particularly the active member test, to me is a huge one. To have the capacity for people to make contributions to their self-managed super fund whilst residing overseas is hugely significant. It's just a shame that we have to wait till 2022 for that to occur. So, these are the ones where we have to sort of hold our breath and talk to our clients and say, okay, you can't do this yet. You need to be mindful of it. But if that active member test goes through, and there appears to be no reason why it shouldn't, but that's going to be a real game changer for self-managed superannuation funds. The central management and control test, I think what that does is it just gives us greater breathing space. I mean, we've always got ways around it with enduring powers of attorney and other areas with regards to appointing another party to act as trustee. And I don't think moving the test from a 2-year test to a 5-year test really takes away the obligation of us to get it right. And to make changes if somebody's not coming back to Australia, make those changes as early as possible. But it just gives us a greater ability to say to people, okay, you can be away for up to 5 years as long as your intention is to remain in Australia or to come back to Australia. Not only can you be away, but you can make contributions. I think that's a big game changer for self-managed superannuation funds. And to me, probably my one comment that I would make on that is what I was pleasantly surprised about with the COVID-19 ATO support was one of the first things they came out with and said was, if you're stuck overseas or can't get back overseas and you're going to fail the 2-year temporary absent test, then we're not going to take sort of any action on that. And I would hope that in the idea that the ATO use hindsight to apply foresight to the future legislation, it'd be great to see the ATO adopting a hear no evil, see no evil kind of approach to Australian super fund definition, and identifying that anyone in this next 12-month cycle who is borderline from a central management and control point of view, that they turn a blind eye. I'm not suggesting that will or won't be the case, but it would be nice for us to get there. So look, thank you for joining us today. In summary, I guess really the point of it is being conversational around these issues and identifying that yes, our contribution limits and our pension limits increase from the 1st of July, but not for everybody. Not everyone's going to be entitled to the levels of indexation. And so, what are we doing over the next 8 days to help out our clients in that situation? We do have legislative measures that have passed through Parliament, which do create more admin issues for us. The bring forward one is clearly the most front of mind, and whilst we all hope for a happy ending there and a capacity to contribute this year, I think we still need to be mindful of what could potentially occur. The 6-member SMSF, we're not all jumping out there and maxing every fund out to 6 members, but understanding that if we're planning for 6-member funds and we've already got a self-managed super fund, what are the ramifications based on the existing trustee? What are we dealing with in that regard? And then what is the direct flow on of things like your future, your super, and the capacity to take a self-managed super fund with you from a young age and staple it from an employer and default contribution point of view. So all of those sorts of things mean, as Jason said from the outset, we're in this minefield of decision making, probably more so than any time where there's an element of uncertainty around it. So we need to plan and be prepared for that. And of course, at these budget announcements, whilst all with some sort of restraints attached to them, they're not coming in until at least the 1st of July 2022, and the legacy pension one is likely to be that same date as well, then triggering a 2-year window, but that's yet to be confirmed. So there is a fair amount to contemplate. So a lot to get through in that hour. Thanks for sticking with us. We'll send through a copy of the presentation to anyone. Jason, did you have any other comments to make before we wrap it up?
No, look, I don't think so. Yeah, pass it on. Awesome.
All right. Well, thanks for joining me, and thank you for your input. As I said, it's really good to have client managers involved because they're seeing what's happening on a day-to-day basis. I mean, I can make all this stuff up as I go along, and often do, but to actually get the realities that some of the things that I'm contemplating are actually happening is certainly beneficial for me. So thanks for joining us. Keep your eye out for upcoming events. We'll have our July webinars online and topics online soon. But thank you all again, and we'll send out your CPD shortly.